Welcome to Morning Call, a podcast where we share our experiences around letting go of grief and learn to move with grace through mourning. We are your hosts, Alyce Christina
and Crystal Lee, two friends who connected through yoga and movement and ultimately found a deeper connection over our own parental losses.
We share how our experiences have informed us to live our lives more authentically, boldly, and in the now so that you can do the same. We believe where there is pain, there is transformation.
From the loss of a loved one to change in a career, a heartbreak, identity shift, and many other forms of loss, we walk this path together.
To discover the light within the darkness, we recognize the joy within pain and invite you to dive in with us as we share in the hope, laughter, and lightness of the mourning journey.
Join us for stories, interviews, and conversations that connect us as we explore the universal experience of loss that invokes the becoming of one's true self. Welcome back to the Morning Call podcast. I'm Crystal.
And I'm Alyce.
And today we're going to be talking about the parallels of birth and death and how they really share a similar energy, given that, you know, there's an actual being and an energetic being, you know, leaving the earth and coming into the earth. So we're just here to talk about the transformation or a transformative experience that both can be. So, you know, Alyce, we're piggybacking off of you talking about in a previous episode, you know, how transformative becoming a mother has been, you know, was and is, and what the identity shift of becoming a parent is like. So obviously I'm not a parent, but I know that that is just obviously a life-changing event. So I'd like to hear from you on maybe some of the initial parallels you have in your mind around birth and death.
Yeah, to piggyback off of where we left off as far as becoming a parent, right? And just in contemplation and reflection of like the conversation we're going into now, right? I had this thought of letting go, right? And we've talked about this ability to shed an identity. And I'd really like to offer like a new language around, right, letting go, like having the permission of like letting go of those different identities that we hold on to, right? The pre-baby Alyce to the post-baby Alyce, right? And when we really allow ourselves to experience ourselves exactly where we are without trying to hold on to what was, gives us a sense of, at least, or gives me and allows me to experience freedom exactly where I am. And I say that because when I lost my mom, there was like, I'd never had an experience like that before in my life. And if there was any parallel that I could relate to in that moment, it was giving birth to Amelia, right? And there was just this energetic, like, all of a sudden I didn't just have to let go of who I was as the daughter of my mother, still am. And, you know, in that physical context, I had to let go of all of these unspoken expectations that I had that my mom would always be there, right? Like I had to dismember myself and everything I knew and had created. And I think in that parallel, going back to like parenting, we so often have an idea of what we think we should be or how we should be a parent. Or and I was just in this great workshop yesterday about authentic marketing, and the leader said, take the shoulds out, right? Because shoulds are hold a connotation of shame, right? And so when we set ourselves up with this sense of shame, we're never going to meet our own expectations, right? And so it's like moving from this I should be a certain way to truly allowing ourselves to let go and simply be.
Yeah, and I think the expectations around both parenting and motherhood and what that should, quote, using the shoulds, look like, as well as the societal expectations of what grieving should, quote, look like, is a parallel, right? Because I'm just like, throw it all out, because I was actually talking to a friend about something completely unrelated, but something she's going through. I was talking to her this past weekend, and we think we know what we'll do in a situation, and then once if we are in the situation, we're like, wait. So I mean, not always. Maybe we will stick to what we thought we would do and be like. I mean, maybe, but I think a lot of times we kind of like should ourselves, if you will, and we think like, well, I would be this kind of parent, or I'll be over my grief in this time frame. And then when we're faced with it, I think my experience was, at least with grief, was like I was just surprised. I surprised myself, and even continue to surprise myself years later. Like, I'm like, okay, this is how I'm feeling, this is what I'm doing, and there's no roadmap. And society wants us to have a roadmap, and that's the part of like just letting that go that you're talking about.
Absolutely. We've been taught to fear the unknown, right? We want all the answers. And guess what? We don't have all the answers. And yeah, and that sense of letting go of whatever it is, that expectation, the expectation of what your birth plan is going to be, or the expectation of how your family is going to show up at a funeral, or or even how you're going to show up. And it's letting go and freeing yourself to be in the experience. And all again, it's a practice. It is always a practice. Um and I wanted to kick off with like that sense of like, how do you let go? How do you let yourself be? Um as a parent, as a grieving mother, daughter, friend, whatever the circumstance, partner, whatever the circumstance may be. And and another parallel, right, was the physical way it happened, right? Amelia's birth process was shocking, right? I had never anticipated. I didn't really have a birth plan, so I didn't really set myself up. However, unconsciously, no one in 2 generations in my family, no um, woman had had a vaginal delivery. And so unconsciously, I was like, I don't need to practice pushing. And then all of a sudden, the nurse says I'm 10 centimeters dilated. It's time to start practice pushing. And I'm like, what the heck? What? Yeah, like, excuse me? I didn't even practice breathing. Right. And I am grateful for like the intuitive trust of letting go and allowing the people around me to guide me, trusting my body. Cause then, I practice pushed and then they were like, you don't have to push anymore. Just you can relax through this contraction. And my body was like, oh no, 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 no. I need to get this baby out. And in hindsight, thank God she did come out very quickly from the moment it was like a 45-minute active pushing, which is very quick, typically for a first baby. And thank goodness I did get her out that quickly because she came out with the umbilical cord around her neck. And so if I would have taken time and like resisted my body's urge to push, something could have happened,
It's almost like you knew your
right?
instinct was there. I mean, you're like, let's come out.
Right, exactly. And then, you know, along that same parallel of experiencing and watching my mom die, there were just moments that were like, I had this feeling. I was like, we need music. And I'm collecting all of mom's favorite songs. And in that process, she came to us, right? And then in another moment, her breathing was getting very labored and it was scary. And, we were trying to keep ourselves calm and my dad calm. And I was like, let me go get a book, right? So I got the book that my mom had been reading for a year, and um, little daily passages. So I flipped to one page, and that was like the one I talked about it in our episode about losing my mom, where the first thing it said is, "Trust me, let go," right? And it's like, oh, right. That is the lesson, right? And as painful as letting go was, and my mom died like an hour later, right? Because I think collectively as a family, we gave her permission to let go by saying it. So after that experience, I'm like mind blown what is happening in my life right now. The only thing I could really latch on to that gave me comfort in the experience was reflecting on how I delivered Amelia and the process of childbirth, because as miraculous as it is to bring life into the world, I feel like it is just as miraculous to witness life exit the world. It is also just as traumatic. I was traumatized after childbirth. I had 41 stitches internally, like delivering a 9-pound, 1 ounce baby with her fist up here because the umbilical cord was around her neck. So she was fighting too, and so, and that trauma was just as relatable as it was to witnessing my mom pass away.
It just reminds me, well, two things we've talked about kind of outside the podcast, you and I, is one, the sacred experience, even though it can be traumatic and often is traumatic, birth and death. Like, I mean, there's beautiful birth stories, of course, but I have a lot of friends who have also had like some sort of trauma. And same with death. It's like, even if someone has this like beautiful death plan and, you're able to follow it and you're by a river and the music's playing, I mean, whatever, like there's some type of trauma, like because you're losing someone and that in itself is traumatic, right? So, but despite all those things, it is a sacred both are a sacred experience. Even before we hopped on, we were talking about how it's an energetic exchange. You have this energetic being and a physical being, but we are our physical bodies are energetic bodies, but that's another topic for another day. But you know in one sense, a whole energy is exploding into the world, right? And it's this person that you've never been with. Like Amelia, it's like she exploded in the world, and it's like your whole life changes. There's a whole new energetic being in your life. And similarly, or like with a parent, at least you've never been without their energetic being your whole life. I mean, of course, if you lose someone else as a spouse, maybe they weren't around your whole life. I'm not saying it's any easier, but the energy of your life experience shifts because an entire being is shifting in or out of it. And that's also a parallel. And you're never going to be the same as you were before.
No, and we talked about like this parallel of grieving ourselves, potentially even post not potentially, yes, postpartum, right? Post having a baby. And you're isolated and sometimes feel alone. Um and I think that that is very hand in hand with the experience of grief when you're going through that grieving process. And postpartum is not linear for anyone. It could last the rest of your life, right? You can be so affected by it, and it doesn't mean you love your child any less, right? And it's the same with grieving. It Our grief is not linear. It's not 1 year and done. It is it's a process. And what one year one is kind of it's not kind of it is numbing, right? Like I think you said, like the year one, you get to year one of a child's life, and you want to celebrate with a big birthday. And is it really for them? No, you're celebrating as a parent because you kept a human being alive, and you're still alive, right? Like,
You're like, we did
um,
it, we did it. That's what you're celebrating yourself.
exactly. And I think that same, after grieving for a year, right? It can be numb and isolating. And I feel like too at that year mark for me, there was a part of me that started to wake up. It might have been right before that year one, but I remember being like, ooh, whoa, like kind of a fog lifted. Like I came out of a haze. And started talking and having conversations with people about my experience, and then being really called to wanting to share it, and realizing that that was connecting me to people with similar experiences, right? To realize that, like, hey, I'm not in this alone. Or someone all of a sudden would lose someone, right? And it gave me such an awareness to what they were going through. Not that it was exactly the same. And I wanted to be there, right? Like I wanted to give them the support that I had in very different ways. And I think that that's like similarly, again, as a young parent, like, or a new parent, I Amelia's going on 12. Can't carry her on my hip, right? But seeing new moms or moms with younger children like in Target, and they're throwing tantrums, and they're in this phase of their life, and if I have the opportunity to catch their eyes, right, to just see them, like, I see you and you doing good, mama, like hang in there because this too shall pass.
It's a coming alongside of someone, and like, not like, to your point, you're not saying necessarily like, I know your exact experience, but you're like, I've been there in some capacity and I see you. And even just that, like for me in grief, I'm like, I didn't like, there's no magical word, there's no magical phrase. It's just like someone being like, I'm here, like I'm alongside you, I see you. I mean, that's really all I needed. I'm not saying that's what everyone needs, but it's like, yeah, someone's seeing you. And, you mentioned the first year. It, well, I was kind of laughing internally because I was like, some parents might say the twos and the threes are worse than the first year. But,
Absolutely. I mean, Amelia was an angel at one, like through her first year, honestly.
yeah,
And then it's like she went to bed on her birthday night and woke up and was a different child. And I was like, what?
right.
She stopped sleeping through the night, and again, like that is a grief process, right? As your child continuously evolves,
Yeah.
you're having these new experiences, and they're all temporary. And
Yes.
again, like the parallel to life after death, right? Like the life I'm living after death, I continue to have all of these first
Yes.
because my mom's not here to witness Amelia go off to her first day of 6th grade. And like that's something to grieve, right? So it's again, it's not linear, it's not, but it's an evolving process that we can bring awareness to and do it together, really.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to say is that I mean, I agree with you. Like me personally, my first year was also really difficult. And I think probably with the first year, because it's just, there's a lot of firsts. The first year of parenthood, like there's just firsts because it's a new person. And there's, the first time they smile at you. I mean, like whatever, like little stuff, right? First little sickness they have. And then like with the death, it's like the first Christmas you have without them, the first, whatever it is, right?
Birthday,
Yeah.
the
And those are,
first, yeah, all the holidays, their birthday. I mean, my birthday was what, a week and a half after my mom passed away. And tremendously grateful for the people that showed up to celebrate me. And I remember what we did. I can't tell you. Yeah, a lot of it was just blurry, right? I can see the pictures and be like, wow, I looked happy. And I know it was like, I drank and I was numbing a lot of feelings that I was trying to suppress. And then I felt guilty for having a good time. And so it's like, I think I went into like a hibernation for a couple of weeks after that. And I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to be around anyone.
well, and that's what I was going to say. It's like, it's our own experience. Like no one has lost your same person. No one is responding to it the same way you are. No one is dealing with the same child that you have, right? Like it's all so unique. And even though a lot of people are experiencing the same firsts, it just feels isolating because they are still your own. And, I like what you said about we discover new facets of selves after a birth and after a death past that first year. Like you're exploring, I'm sure Amelia at 12 is different than Amelia at 9, right? And like who I am 7 years past my dad dying, I'm definitely not the same person I was before he died. Like sometimes I'm like, I don't even recognize that person. But even just, in 3 years ago, right? Versus now, it's been 7 years. So it's like, it's a constant like peeling of the onion, which is, I'm going back to like, it's just another parallel of these two major life experiences.
Absolutely.
Another thing that we mentioned kind of in relation to, and you mentioned this with like, having a birthday party, but another thing that I think is a parallel kind of in relation to, um, not even just the isolation, but those early days, right? Is, and we've talked about community ad nauseum on this podcast, and we probably will forever because I know it's important to both of us. But thinking about who our community is and making sure they're set up to support us in these big life shifts is critical.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that I became aware that there is such thing as a death doula, right? I've always heard of a birthing doula, right? And then I lost my mom and started diving deep into things that I experienced through her death and from lymphatic massage to, hospice care and how amazing these people were. And then, started and then discovered a death doula on Instagram, fed it to me, right? And going with Grace. I know we've both, um, resonate with her and her content and her mission. Um, and I think that is very important because in those phases of life, whether it's like bringing life into the world or life exiting the world, those early moments can be very disorienting, and to have someone there advocating for you in a moment where you may be overwhelmed, can't remember things. I could hardly remember 2 plus 2 after I
Brain
had
fog.
Amelia.
Oh my God. Yes. And I think in both scenarios, your like hormones and adrenaline and whatever the heck is going on in your body, chemicals after a birth and after a death, like you don't know what the heck is going on. Like the fact that like you take a baby home like 2 days later, I'm like, what? I'm like, your brain is not functioning. I mean, so after death, my brain, I was like, I like couldn't form sentences. I'm like, how do I talk? Like it was so bad. Sorry, keep going.
No, and I think that, and I think it's becoming more of a norm, especially with birth, to have a doula and to have that person. One thing that is changing, I've observed changing, and hope it will continue to change, that the doula doesn't end when the baby is born, that there is a post doula, right? And similarly, like a death doula can be in preparation, it can be during, and it absolutely can carry through to be after. And I feel like that's just a necessity for both, right? Because, and one thing that I will be very intentional about, um, creating for myself, whether it's with my dad, and definitely for me, and doing that very intentionally
100%. And that makes
for
me,
life and death.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, well, for sure. It reminds me of something else we've talked about before, in that I think we have a lot of room to grow in this area with caring for parents, but specifically mothers after a baby is born, because we really don't, I mean, we have communities, but we don't live in the community lifestyle of like back in the day where we like lived within your community, literally like next door. So there's just less support in the way we're structured. But I am seeing an improvement in like just the dialogue and discussion around that, and acknowledging that parents and mothers need more support in those, I mean, really, again, within that first year, um, and building those structures, like you're just saying, having a birth doula go beyond just the birth. And like a lot of, again, we're in the US, but like a lot of, there's been better changes. I think there can be more, but in parental leave, right? And what those things look like. And I think the same could apply, speaking of parallels, to bereavement leave. And we want to eventually interview our friend from an organization called Evermore that's working to change legislation around bereavement leave in the US. Because similarly, I think we need to also acknowledge that people need longer support in their grief. Like people get like 3 days off work or 5 days. And I'm like, you're still not even making sense of what's happening in those 5 days. So I just, I'm hoping that how the conversation is changing around parenthood and birth will also like start to shift around death and grieving in terms of a support capacity. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And I think it's one way that we can offer that support is by removing the should from ourselves, right? This an unrealistic expectation that we need to be a certain way in parenthood, in the way we grieve loss, whatever the loss is, right? It is, and creating more of an, not a sympathy and empathy to be with people. I think that's our key, and allowing ourselves to shed, like to free ourselves from that expectation, right? To free, you know, letting go of my marriage for me was so liberating. Letting go of who I thought I should be in a marriage and as a mother enabled me, not just enabled, it empowered me to be me and to be happy. And therefore, I have a badass kid, right? And that's not to say she doesn't struggle or go through challenges. However, again, and I've just been seeing and hearing a lot of content around this lately, that like a happy parent, when a parent feels supported and empowered, whether in a relationship or not, they have more patience, they have to give to, they have more kindness to share, more love, right? Like I can feel it in my body when I'm not serving myself at 100% because I can't serve Amelia at 100%. I have no patience. I and it's interesting because again it ties into the experience of losing my mom, and when grief is really getting under my skin, my patience is the first thing to go, right? Because I get almost paralyzed and I don't want to serve myself because for whatever reason, I'm afraid to feel, right? And I want to like stuff it down and I want to hide it. Um, and yeah, just it's okay to not be okay, right? So then again, that correlates to who we should be or how we should be again when we're grieving, right? Let that shit go. Let that expectation, yeah, just let it go. So that you can free, so that we can collectively free ourselves to show up for ourselves. Therefore, we have the power to show up for each other.
Well, and this reminds me of something you said in I think it was the last episode about your identity shifting as a mother and after divorce, and how you chose to lead from your like truest self, like the capital S self or whatever we want to call it. And we even mentioned on that a lot of people choose to kind of like live unconsciously and not do that, and that's a choice. But like for me, that's just what you're saying made me think of after my dad died. It almost like forced me to listen to that inner self. Like I was just so, I'm not saying it made me enlightened. That's not what I mean. There were so many like conflicting emotions and feelings and voices and shoulds from the outside. This is how you should be grieving. This is how you should be doing this. This is whatever. And I had to kind of like get quiet and be like, wait. What am I saying? What do I need? What does my capital S self need to like take care of myself? Because I'm not going to be able to like give back to anyone else if I'm not doing that. And that's, what you said, that like, if you don't do that as a parent with Amelia, it's like a disservice to both of you.
Absolutely. And I think it goes hand in hand with grief too. Like we have to have the courage to tell our employers like, no, today is not a good day and I'm not going to be of service to myself or to anyone in the office. So, what can I, and yes, that's like my utopian brain of like, right. And I think that those are, the more we empower people to embrace that, I think we're doing it with mental health, right? To be able to call and empower and say, hey, no, today I am not 100%. And my 100% looks like 50% today. That also looks like me staying in my pajamas and working on my computer all day on the couch, right? And so taking that same concept, foundation, empowerment, whatever you want to call it, into how we are perceiving ourselves through the grief process. And then that, I think, ultimately creates a more compassionate community, right? For us to be able to show up because, you know, bigwig bosses, they're not always 100%, or their 100% is sometimes 50%, right? But they may have the perception that they have to be on it all the time. Well, guess what that creates? Burnout, right? Or we crash or we implode at some point because that kind of working is not sustainable. And as humans, I believe we're not supposed to be like that either. We are supposed to take those moments to go outside and smell the roses and roll in the grass or whatever, jump in an ocean or, right, really connect to the energy that lives in and around us, which again brings us back to those parallels of like the energy of life and the energy of death. We could even take this conversation to birthing an idea, right? This idea, this podcast morning call was birthed out of us getting over the fear of like being like, "Ugh, is this a conversation people really want to listen to?" Well, it doesn't matter because it's a conversation that means something to us, and the energy that we keep cultivating and putting out in the world is building, right? And it's shifting conversation, even if it's just for like a handful of people right now, right? Like I truly trust that. Like again, it's like the energy of life and the energy of death is ever evolving, even down to the way we create life, art, ideas.
And you're speaking to living from our humanness, right? Like there's nothing more human than the process of birth, and there's nothing more human than the process of death. Like we're all going to do both. And that is like the beginning and end of our humanness. And in the in between, what you're saying is I'm hearing almost two things. Is one, when we deny our humanness, like these bosses or whoever it is, right? Like people that don't want to talk about the hard
That
stuff.
example.
No, 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 no. That is a great example. I mean, I've had both kinds of bosses, those that like just completely are ignore all that. And then some that do lead from their humanness, which is like a beautiful experience. And they're like, yeah, like take your time. And I've lost my so-and-so too. I mean, that's like, I've been lucky, but when it's not like that, it's not fun. But it could be just, friends that maybe aren't comfortable with talking about birth or death, right? And it's like when you're denying that humanness and honest conversations, it's like, okay, so you want to live in the in between, like just being like half a human? Like you're not really living in your fullness. Um, and I forget the other thing I was like hearing, but I think, oh, when you're saying when we, using this podcast and using our voices to create that language around living from our humanness, it allow we've talked about this before, but it allows others to do the same, and it creates a paradigm shift like across a whole society, right? Because if we just continue to live at like half, everyone else, it's a trickle down effect. Everyone else is going to do the same.
Yes, and to say that you like even if you don't ever deliver a child, don't deny yourself that you don't create life, right? Embrace the life that you do create and the way that you nurture your dogs, your animals, your family, your friends, whoever, your strangers on the street. Like, honor and celebrate the way in which you do nurture your community, or maybe it's just even yourself. And that's freaking awesome, right? And then I think it's, and then, don't deny yourselves. Like, don't, exactly what you said. Don't just be like, it's like, I think there's two ways it could go. It's, being half human, like not fully human, or being like extra human, right? Because you can deny yourself this, right? And no, like, be whole in the experience of life that you are choosing, right? That allows you to be whole for everyone else. And we don't have to understand what each other are going through or what each other believe, yet we can accept. We can accept with an understanding that I may never get it, and that's okay. And you may never get me, and that's okay. Yet we can see each other with eyes of compassion and still connect because we human. Thank you for joining the Morning Call podcast. Our intention is that you found a nugget of hope, inspiration, connection, or all of the above.
If you seek to dive deeper with the Morning Call community, email us, subscribe to our page, leave a review, and fill out our survey.
We want to hear your stories and widen the conversation to support and empower our grief experiences as we collectively become our true selves.
Find us and subscribe on all streaming platforms, YouTube, and at Morning Call Podcast on Instagram. You can also email us at morningcallpodcast@gmail.com.
This podcast was edited by Alexis Carrasquillo from Familia Creative Media.